833-653-3529. 833-653-3529. And that'll give you direct connection through our Zoom account. Now, we've had a lot of incredible stories going on in the news, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I was watching one of the news channels. And one of the things that perturbed me is that the news channels are consistently creating new terms and they're reversing the original meaning. Like, for example, the folks that are coming up from various countries in Latin America, South America, whatever, they're calling them migrant workers. They are immigrants seeking work in the United States. Migrant workers, back when I was growing up, were people who did seasonal work in their city or state. And when that seasonal work ended, like if you lived in South Florida, during the wintertime, you harvest corn, you harvest beans and things like that, and celery. But then as the summertime came, if you were agricultural work, they moved north to other states to do the same type of work. They were migrant workers. And those were hardworking people who just simply earning a living, but the farm work was not year-round back in the 60s. And so they migrated from state to state during the summertime or during the heat of the summer when there was no work in South Florida. And now South Florida became a big tourist state, but didn't always be that way. And so that was an example of migrant work. Now they're calling immigrants migrant workers. And I don't know, it just didn't sit me in the right way when I was listening to TV news. I was thinking, well, this is dumb. They've changed the definition of something. The second issue that bothers me, and I'm not griping today, but they've taken the word woke and all of a sudden it's a bad thing. We have a guy running for president of the United States, apparently, and he has made the term woke a bad word. This original thing about woke or stay awake had to do with the slavery time originally, when slaves were attempting to escape, or in certain areas, they had to stay awake or stay woke in order to not be tortured or maimed or murdered. Stay awake or stay woke. And that was the slang, the mantra during that time period. And during the 60s, when we had the Jim Crow laws, things like that, same thing. Well, in 2014, I remember watching Black Lives Matter. They abbreviated Stay Woke. And that was an alert for racial prejudice and discrimination. So the whole idea of woke or stay awake had to do with oppression, murder, lynching, and things like that. Now, all of a sudden, we have a guy who's running for president unannounced who says a bad thing. So we're taking words that objectively mean something quite different than what they're using it for, and they're reversing it. Now, all of a sudden, woke is a bad word. My suggestion is you need to stay awake, because now we see a turn in our American democracy. Because of these ill-conceived uses of terminology, we've seen people try to overthrow the federal government. In 2021, on January 6th, we had people who saw the candidate lose by more than 7 million votes, somehow thought that he won the election. And still today, we looked at the latest statistics that say that 30% of Americans still believe that the person who lost the election by a near record number of votes, they thought that he won. And so they decided to try to overthrow the federal government. And now we're seeing this drip of prosecution in this field. And, but locally, in 2023, we have a mayoral election. And we're going to discuss that real briefly about our upcoming mayoral election here in Indianapolis. It's a legal issue because a lot of things that we do in the city are controlled by the office of the mayor and the city council. They make the determination of what streets to repair, the quality of life issues are all determined by that. And we have a call already. A caller, you have a question or comment for legal issues of today, sir?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you actually are talking about local issues today. Just refer to me as Flintstone. And the reason I'm calling this in, Mr. Lee, because I saw where this Jefferson Shreve gentleman from the Republican Party is going to be the contender against Mayor Joe Hogsett. And as I looked at some of his political ads that were out there, I didn't see anyone in his ads that represented what I consider to be the majority of folks in Marion County. He's a South Side Republican. That his own business, and he's showing it off, and that's great for him. But I didn't see anything that would represent any type of complexity of people that exist within this county. He's also indicated that when he gets in office, he's going to change things so that the police officers have basically more rights to do the things that they need to do to control crime. I don't know if that's a bell whistle or not, but it seems like it could be. He also indicated that once he gets in the office, he'll control the east end of Market Street, while his Republican state legislature, which is a majority, will control the west end of Market Street. That will not be good for people of color or any other shape here in town. So what's our city council doing? I'm trying to understand what's going on with this gentleman, Duke Oliver, who's putting up parks for kids to play in, and I saw that on the news the other day, and I thought to myself, well, what's that all about? Because everybody I saw playing in the park didn't look like any people that I know. I'm African American, and I'm just trying to understand where he's coming from and what the city council is doing. There's a lot to be addressed here. I appreciate everything you do for the community.
Well, wait a second. Wait a second, Cole.
Wake up.
Well, wait a second, Cole. Let me cover a couple of things because you raised a number of issues. First of all, the gentleman who's running for mayor's office against Joe Hogsett, Jefferson Shreve, I pulled his commercials in his company, and I was surprised that a person in 2023 who apparently has an MBA degree and was unaware of the fact that the city has about 40% diversity. So his claim to fame is, I hire a lot of people, but I don't hire minorities. I don't hire African Americans and Hispanics. So he has on his company website his employees, no minorities. Now, I'm thinking to myself, what makes you think that you're qualified to ask for votes in the minority community when you yourself have said that they're unwelcome in my company? And I was just shocked that this person would be that naive. Even make a faint attempt to show that you're racially diverse. He made no such overture. The second issue had to do with police and law enforcement. As you know, we have an African American chief of police, and but at the same time, we've had an increase in gun violence. I am sickened in the city when I see this gun violence because most of the time it's teenagers or people like that. They're shooting other teenagers or adults, and it's a problem that I think is terrible. But the genesis of gun violence has to do with the fact that we have access to too many guns. America is 3% of the world population, but we're over 50% of private gun ownership. So what did the legislator in Indiana do last year? They passed a law to eliminate almost any requirements to own a gun. No background check necessary, no gun permit where they do a police check, do fingerprints, see whether or not you have felonies. And so what we did is that we gave people unlimited right to obtain guns. Now we passed statutes say if you're a felon, you shouldn't have it, but if you don't have no basis to check background, things like that, what difference does it make? And also you can buy guns at gun shows in our state, which a lot of people do. So the crime in our community, the gun violence, there's a direct correlation between gun violence that you see happening on a regular basis and the like of gun control. Now, this is a really touchy subject. We also have the third issue of gun violence, which is mass shooting or mass murders or mass killing. We saw, and we covered this on one of our prior shows, the dramatic increase in mass shooting after Trump became president, because the NRA said that they want to spend the scope of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment never stated that guns should be available to every lunatic that want to get a gun. And so in their expansion of the Second Amendment, they did not continuation of the assault weapons ban. And so the net result is that we've seen mass murders in all over the country. We used to have 200 or more of these mass murders or mass shootings in our country. This year, we're on task to get over 600. And during the Trump era, it went from about 200 to 600. And that's because there's a reduction in the legislation, a reduction in the laws that requires people to have license. We got rid of the assault weapons ban. And so how did that affect the Indianapolis community? Well, we're not an island. We're part of the United States of America. When guns are everywhere in our state, in our country, then we have the net effect is that in our community, we see an increase in gun usage. Now, we don't have gun manufacturers making guns in Indianapolis, as far as I know, and they're shipped in the community. But the problem is that our government, which is controlled by a Republican majority, have passed laws that allows guns to be openly carried. I don't know about you, but I don't think that giving everybody the ability to carry a gun openly and obviously is any mode of protection for me. Because with the increase in mental incapacity such as depression and bipolar disorders and things like that, if we allow access to guns for everyone, how does that protect us? And so when I see a person run for mayor of Indianapolis who says that he wants to do something about gun violence, and I realize that his ideology is what causes the problems. In other words, if you say that I support the NRA and the Second Amendment expansion to everyone, you're supporting gun violence, because that's the root of gun violence. Too many guns by the wrong people. So,
but I agree with you. But again, what is our city county council that has a great deal of representation of African American people on it doing about that? And again, he also indicated that, hey, I'll have the east side of Market Street and I've got my friends on the west side. Exactly what does that mean, and what kind of powers would he be giving to the police department to control this gun violence now that everyone has a gun? I'll just stand by and listen, because I'm sure, I'm hoping some of your other callers are listening in. And Indianapolis, we need to really get involved in this and get out and vote, because if Shreve gets in the next mayoral election, that would be Republicans controlling everything. They already got a super majority in the state. They'll have Marion County, which they've been trying to get for years. And that is a concern that I have. Thanks.
Well, to your point, well, you mentioned, Duke Oliver, before I get in that, you mentioned Councilman Oliver. I was a big supporter of his, but you're right about one thing. Even though he advocated the protection of African American, but in his leadership on the city council, he got rid of all the African American vendors. And I tried to stop that. I just thought it was ill-conceived, and I just thought that I can't support a person like that ever again, because I'm for all gentrification, but there was a lot of people that were moving in the neighborhood wanted to have more walking parks. So they got rid of Riverside Golf Course. Well, I'm a little bit biased because I used to like to go out there every now and then, but the course had historical significance. It's one of the first courses in Indiana, 18 holes, where African Americans were allowed to play golf. So it was a place where a lot of people would meet up and talk and things like that. And so he got rid of the golf course to make it a walking park, But then at the same token, he got rid of all the African-American vendors for the parks department. It was shameful. And I just thought that our city council people need to be held accountable when they make dumb decisions like that affect our community. We need to at least confront him about it because he was just dead wrong. Now,
I agree with you absolutely. I mean, I vote in every election, primaries and all that, but our city county council members, they always talk about woke society. They need to wake up and get real. This is, we've lost some really good leaders over the years, do different things, and these new leaders, like Oliver and whatever, they need to really address the issues that are impacting our community. We've owned this city. Unigov messed it up and tried to take it. We still own it. You got all these donut counties around here that are getting more, I guess, publicity and things they need, because every time you look at the news, it's always about Carmel, and now it's Westfield, and the only thing you hear about Marion County is the crime. And then you get someone like Jefferson Shreve walking in saying, I'm going to change that, and I'm a Republican, and I have my own business with no minorities I saw in any of his ads. I may be wrong. Maybe somebody out there is listening that works for Jefferson Shreve. I'd like to hear more about it. But anyway, that's my comment. I hope someone's listening in and paying attention. Appreciate what you do.
There was one thing you said, though. I did before the show, I tried to search his ads, and I looked on his website, and I looked at all the employees on his website. I looked at the TV commercial, and in his TV commercial, he had no minorities. So I suspect that when these politicians pivot for the general election, I assume that he'll be intelligent enough to at least fake it by getting minorities in his commercials. I don't know. I mean, that's what politicians do in modern society. But the core problem I have is that you grow a successful company, but you advertise that you did not decide to hire any people from our community, which is a sad commentary. And so the second part of what you said, caller, dealt with the police department. Let's talk about that real quickly. Back in the 80s, I became the vice president of NAACP, and the biggest issue we dealt with is the Marion County Jail back in the late 80s had 1,200 inmates. And I did a case with a white defendant, one of the last criminal cases. I did a civil practice, but I used to do criminal cases also back in the early 80s. And they tried to do a lineup, caller, and when they did the lineup, they had 4 white guys with the brown sheriff pen and my client. And so I filed a motion to suppress, and this is a suggested lineup. You got 4 officers in sheriff uniform and a guy in prison garment. Well, who do you think they're going to identify, right? So get this case thrown out and say, you can't use this lineup, right? And now you've given bias to the witness, and so now their testimony is tainted, right? Well,
absolutely.
Well, ways get worse. So then, this back in the 80s, when we had Republicans in power, I discovered that there was 1,200 people in the Marion County Jail, 1,148 were Black males. Black males were 9% of the population of Marion County, but they were 95% of the people in the Marion County Jail, 95%. So the root of the problem was not that the Black males were committing 95% of crime, they were not. But it had to do with stops. So when you talk about police power, what the police were doing is that in order to arrest Black males, they would pull them over suspiciously, and then they get in words, and so they arrest them for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, resisting and fleeing, battering an officer. So the code word for them to beat up the African-American suspect was to say battery on the officer. So apparently they get in a fight and they beat the hell out of the guy, and they would get away with it. So that was the policing that we dealt with in terms of litigation, negotiation, and all that stuff back in the 80s. And so when they're talking about giving police more power, I like the system we have now because we've had more police officers prosecuted and under the current prosecutor than ever before. See, so the idea of a democracy and no person is above the law is important. So even police officers, who are many clients and friends of mine, I have outstanding police officers. I'm no police haters. We represent hundreds of police officers. But we're talking about there are some police officers that are bad, like there are bad lawyers, bad doctors, but there's a whole lot of bad officers who probably shouldn't be on the police department, right? So when a mayor or candidate say that we're going to give them more power, More power to do what? And that's my
what
concern.
worries me. That's what worries me. More power to do what?
Yeah, see, because here's the other part of that. When I look at the catastrophic nature of violence in our community, it appears to me that most of these shooting, a lot of them are people that know each other, right? So
Yes.
if a husband shoots a wife, if a wife shoots a husband, that's nothing that law enforcement can do about that. In other words, the only thing you could do if a person have a mental disease or some domestic battery is not allow them to own a gun, go back to gun permit. So the only protection we have in that situation is the lack of access to these weapons that kill people. You can kill people with knives and stuff like that, but the gun is such a tremendous weapon to murder someone versus anything else at this point in history. The gun allows a person weaker or less status to murder anyone. And whereas a knife, at least you may be able to defend yourself somewhat, but the gun doesn't give you any protection. And so my concern is that when we're talking about reduction in gun violence, caller, we need to talk more about how do we reduce the number of guns in our community. So when you're talking about giving police more power, well, we don't solve a problem if everybody got guns. That means that if police sees a gun in an African-American car, do they shoot him because they suspect that he is what they say is that I was in fear of my life, whatever, and that gives them a code word that I could shoot and murder you. You know, and so, Carl, that's my concern is that are we signaling that we want to give them more power to shoot people out of our community? You know, that's what I don't get.
That's what it sounds like to me. And I'm also concerned that they developed this new commission that was, I guess, led out to the city about 36 hours ago that are going to have this commission now, people that will go in and deal with people that have mental illnesses. They will call them before they call the police. That seems a little inconsistent to me. However, it's a new program. I want to see how that's going to work.
Well, I tell you what, I think that I'm in support of dealing with the mentally ill because I see it on a regular basis. Like, you know, my office is downtown at 531 East Market Street, right? And we have a homeless shelter nearby. And we had some early problem with dealing with the people from the homeless shelter, some of which had mental process, and they would do things that would somewhat of annoyance. And so, but, you know, I don't need to call the police on it. They're not people out there trying to murder anybody. They're just people out there trying to survive, and they have some pre-existing mental conditions. Some of them, not all of them. Some of them just had bad circumstances. But the way I see it is that if we had folks with specialized training, and that we, as America, we are not a country that believe in unjust punishment as a general rule. And we believe as America that no person is above the law. So just because a person is mentally ill, they should have some modicum of protection, right? And what I mean is our police officers' duty is to protect and serve, but they're not necessarily psychiatrists or mental health therapists. And so if we have people dealing with a medical emergency, which a lot of people are now, I think that it's more appropriate we let health professionals like doctors and psychiatrists deal with the problem. Because, caller, the number one cause of death probably in our community now is probably not homicide, it's probably suicide, you know, or death by fentanyl, you know, the drug usage. And when people get a small dose of fentanyl, it's sometimes irreversible and they die. And so we've seen a high number of people in our community die by drug uses or suicide. The numbers are just staggering right now. And so those statistics we're not talking about publicly, but this is this. You can call the Marion County Coroner's Office and see the numbers that doesn't get publicized by the number of people that are dying with this outgrowth of this disease process, which is the fact that we're dealing with a healthcare emergency. So because we're dealing with healthcare emergency, I believe that we need healthcare professionals to deal with this issue. Because, you know, a lot of time I see people that get shot on the news by police officers. There's a growing trend that a large percentage of those are African Americans. So anything we can do to protect folks, I'm all in favor of it. Because I've had a lot of personal experience in dealing with these homeless people. Never once did I feel threatened, even though they've been saying crazy stuff. I never considered them to be a threat. You know, maybe that's just my thought process, but I just didn't. And so if instead of having them arrested, I would prefer that a healthcare professional deal with the person, get them adequate housing and things like that, because they're real people. Their circumstances are bad, but I think that they should have a right to live.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I hope that this new commission at the Hogsett group has decided that they want to put in place will be something that will work for those folks.
Well, thank you so much, caller, and we appreciate the opportunity to deal with this important issue. Now we have another caller. Milton, what do you have a question or comment for us today, sir?
How you doing, Brother Nate? Thanks for taking my call, and to everybody else that's on the network here. Just got done coaching soccer at TAB, so I didn't know it was on there, but I caught you, and I want to throw this at you.
One last thing, question. Have you seen those Shreve commercial yet? Jefferson Shreve?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen any of them yet.
Well, just Google them and just check out the
sure.
story, because I looked at them before the show started today, and I didn't see any people of color in the commercial. I saw one of the commercials like he was trying to make Joe Hogsett like he was a person of color. It was just bizarre, those commercials.
It's bizarre.
It seemed like these are commercials that run in the deep South somewhere versus one in an urban city. You know, we're the 12th largest city in the country, and just didn't go over well with me, those commercials.
Right. And Roland Martin has complained for the last, probably 7 to 8 years about the DNC and the lack of monies by the DNC spent with the black-owned media and stuff like that. Roland has lamented it for a long time. So that could be an issue too, black-owned media, black-owned advertisers that can, that can talk. Remember, people always talk about facial recognition software. Well, the guy that created facial recognition, he didn't put black people in the equation. That's why we don't come up good on it. That's why it's not admissible, especially when it comes to us, because we were never equated in the equation when they created facial recognition. So that's why it should never, anybody, if you listen and they tell you they match you facial, you tell them you want a lawyer real fast. That doesn't, especially black, that doesn't fly. But I wanted something you made. The Virginia, is that the Fourth Circuit up there? The ruling on the Virginia ban on gun purchases for anyone under 21 that got struck down the other day. It was a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old that brought the case, and the federal judge struck that down. Since the Wren decision said that the test has to be what was the intention of the original intention of the founding fathers. I guess that was in Wren, and so they struck that down. And so I just thought again. I said, here we are again. We know the maturity of young people is not mature enough to where you want to make them not buy cigarettes at 21. You want to hold them off, driver's license. You got to go through hell to get a driver's license. What you got to do to even play the car? And yet here we are. That decision in Virginia, struck down that. I want your opinion on that. And but we did get. I don't know if Attorney Banks is on, but you did get the Illinois assault weapons ban was upheld. I mean, the Supreme Court refused to hear it. So what are your thoughts on both of those?
Well, the Fourth Circuit, the chief judge is a hero of mine, Judge Roger Gregory. We had him come to Indianapolis to speak to the judges in the state of Indiana. And so he's a remarkable jurist, and he has authored some of the best decisions in the history of our country at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The second highest court in the land, of course, are the circuit courts. And once the circuit court render their opinion, they become the law of the land, unless the case gets transferred to the U.S. Supreme Court. Historically speaking, most of the circuit court decisions have been upheld, and the U.S. Supreme Court would only engage in a very small number of actual cases that they decide to litigate. And there are so many reasons why you could get a case into the Supreme Court, but it was very difficult. Like, for example, we had the case of Dave versus the city of Indianapolis, and that was a case where the police officer over at 10th and Midhofer, or not Midhofer, but I can't think of the street, but it was on the far east side of Indy. And this young teenager died as a result of positional asphyxiation. And the police officer refused to allow him to go to the hospital when he couldn't breathe. And the ambulance company, at the same time, they recently lost a medical malpractice case our firm was doing. They did not transport him to the hospital. So this young man perished on the city street. It was death by misconduct. So this case, we went at the district court level, and it goes to the Seventh Circuit. Well, Amy Barrett on the Seventh Circuit, and they throw the case out. So a meritorious case where a person dies. So you get this decision whereby become the law of Indianapolis that you could basically torture African American in the city and get away with it. So there's no civil liability and there's no criminal liability. And so I thought it was one of the worst decisions ever, but it's one of the decisions that we're dealing with here in the city. And they got away with killing this young man, and there's no repercussion. On some cases, a lot of people in the community, they're outraged by, but this case, because it did not garner a lot of outrage because he was an average kid and it wasn't covered on social media, and there was not a lot of outrage about it. So you see that from time to time. In terms of the Virginia decision, I didn't follow that because there were so many cases in the news cycle.
It sure is.
Every day I wake up, there's cases after cases populating all over the country, and I just can't keep track of them anymore. I mean, you can't wake up any day and not see 150 different cases.
Right. What do you think about the Supreme Court refusing to hear the assault weapons ban in Illinois? I think that angered. Actually, it was Oak Park or Naperville, one of them that first instituted the assault weapons ban before the governor, I think, did it statewide. But the Supreme Court refusing to hear that, I thought, sent shockwaves. So you don't know which way to go. You don't know. I mean, they refused to hear that, which the lower court upheld the assault weapons ban, and then, now you have the Virginia, because sometimes you don't know what to think from any of it. Sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. You allow a ban to go on, but then you don't allow a ban on the 21. It has.
Well, wait a second. Here's the deal. Here's the deal that some legal scholars are saying. I don't necessarily agree with this, but they're saying that the current version of the Supreme Court, and we'll get back to that. I have some issue with the Supreme Court now. Maybe it's a lot of people characterize them as the corrupt Supreme Court, but the problem is that when they did the Dobbs decision, they returned to state rights to make those decisions on women reproductive rights, right? So
right.
Some scholars are saying that maybe they're trying to retain the state value. And the 11th Amendment, we're the United States of America, but the states themselves are autonomous governing body that they make laws and they elect officials.
Federalism, yes, federalism.
So the net result is some people are saying that maybe it's not a radical departure, but I don't sense any consistencies anymore in any of those court rulings, because it appears to me that most of the rulings that I've seen seem to be more political in nature than on jurisprudence.
That's what I think too.
These rules, and even when they made that one decision, you remember in the opinion written by Justice Thomas,
yeah. and Wren. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought when I read that, I can't remember the exact verbiage he said, but I thought that it also included the fact that they may reconsider the same-sex marriage or something. There was something bizarre about that opinion. When I saw that, I'm saying, he didn't say reconsider interracial in Loving versus Virginia case, which was interesting, same type concept, but he wanted to reconsider the Marriage Act that says that men can marry men, women can marry women. And so I thought that was kind of odd, but it seemed like to me that the only thing that I haven't read the opinion, but I watched some of the legal scholars. They're just saying that maybe it's a return to state rights. I'm guessing, you know, if I get some time, I'll read the opinion, but right now it's not on my radar.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the fact that we have these laws in our state, Imhotep, where any lunatic now can own a gun. That doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense. And then the last thing is Representative Bowman and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Your thoughts on that? I was happy he addressed it. I was happy he didn't let it go. But I know, my family all lives in Conyers and Lithonia and Carpentersville and around Union City and around Atlanta. And everyone there to tell you where she's from, people down there majority think just like her. So all of a sudden you're carrying AR-15s and 16s, and now all of a sudden you're threatened by Representative Bowman, who I watched the whole thing. He didn't do nothing, but they were laughing and giggling and being playful banter for the whole time. Then all of a sudden she changed it over and wanted to talk about she felt threatened and he was aggressive, and these buzzwords. And then lastly, $2.5 million raised for the subway guy accused of manslaughter. $2.5 million raised from him. I can guarantee you, out of the 30,000 folks that gave him money, if it's 100 black folks, I'd be shocked. So black people, do you understand? This is the reason why I defend my people no matter what. Because we got a guy who choked a man on a subway, and they have raised $2.5 million for his defense. Thanks for taking my call, Nick.
Well, you know what? I watched the killing of the young man on the subway, and the chokehold that he did on him is a death chokehold. It's Brazilian. It developed from Brazilian martial art, and they taught that when I was in the military. It's a technique that you use, and so the way it works is that it cut off oxygen to the brain. So when you're in training, you're doing this procedure. What occurs is that you get dizzy, and then a weaker person can kill a stronger person. But in this case here, he came up from behind the gentleman. So he had a clear, unmitigated reference point to employ this deadly chokehold. Now, the thing about it, though, that you need to know is that people say it's accidental. No, it isn't. When you put the chokehold on somebody, you can feel the life coming out of them. If you ever did the chokehold, and so once the person started, passing out, and they pass out first, you just take the chokehold off, or they tap out. So you're doing training. If the person you get in a position of peril, you just tap out, and then they're supposed to release it. Now, it's difficult to escape from this chokehold because you have to have some special training. There's certain procedures you do, but it's very difficult. You have to try to relieve the pressure, but an untrained person, it's a death chokehold. But the person doing it, he knows that he's killing the person. Why? Because you can feel it. When the life starts leaving someone, they first pass out, you know that they're passing out. The body becomes limp because you cut off the oxygen to their brain. And so you're supposed to release it. So he could have released him at any time after the first 30 or 45 seconds, because the guy would have been unable to defend himself at that point in time for a period of time. And, maybe that's something that people should be aware of. Most people aren't. They think that somehow he could use self-defense. In self-defense of who? We have people with mental disease among us all the time. But the question is, where do we draw the line? If he's not a real identifiable threat to anyone, then he should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law for at least manslaughter. However, if they get the right type of technical expert to show what he actually did, then I think across the line is just flat out murder. It's a slight difference, because I believe that when you employ this deadly chokehold, that you actually know that you're killing somebody. Because I've learned the technique, and we learned to employ it a long time ago. And so I don't think that the people that are donating money really fully understand that this is not an unintentional killing. And that's what disturbed me about this, and we talked about earlier with the earlier caller, we have a lot of people with mental health issues. They're all around us. And a lot of people that are suffering from mental health issues, they're put in a position and they can't get out of it because they have a mental health issue. And so that does not give us a right to indiscriminately go out and start murdering people with mental health challenges. You know, many of us that have friends or family members that are accosted with these disease process, it happens. And so what do we do about it? Well, the one thing that we must do as a society is that we try to be a little bit more understanding of what the disease process is and how to treat it. So when we see people that are suffering from a mental health crisis, as Americans, we should do what we can to try to eliminate the crisis. Now, one of the things that we're dealing with now is that every now and then, mental health crises become gun violence. So there's a distinction between a guy on the subway who pretend to be Michael Jackson from time to time, who sings, who's dance, and then start talking lunatic type things, versus a guy with AR-15. Now, if you were to take a person on the subway with an AR-15, a gun, to start killing people, then in order to save lives, then I think it's permissible to use deadly force in that situation, that limited situation where the assailant put people's life in actual jeopardy, like he has a gun, or maybe he has a knife. A knife is a very deadly weapon, particularly in close quarters. But if a person is unarmed, who's having a mental health crisis, and you put a chokehold on that person, my opinion is very clear. The chokehold that he used, folks, the person employing that know exactly when the person is passing out. You know exactly when the person is dying, because if you had any training on that, you can feel the person's life leaving them. You can actually feel it because you put your left arm goes underneath his neck and it goes into your right elbow joint. Your right hand goes behind their head. So when the person tries to escape, once you get the hand locks in place, their attempting to escape actually creates more of an obstruction to their passages of air to their brain. So if they try to move anything else, they're actually killing themselves faster. So the person will stop movement, and that's why they die, because they have no oxygen going to the brain. And so I think that the prosecutor's office did the right thing by filing charges. And I think that it's ill-conceived for people to think that it's a good idea to support someone who indiscriminately killed someone on a subway. I think it's a bad idea. You know, there was a lot of other things he could have done other than kill this person who's having a mental health crisis on the subway. That's just my opinion. Now, the other issue we're dealing with is that what I didn't talk about, we have a looming debt crisis coming up. We have each day, I've been waking up lately, every day this week, there's been a mass shooting somewhere in this country, every day. At the rate we're going, we're going to have over 600 plus mass shootings in America this year. And as an American, what you need to ask yourself, what can be done to reduce these mass shootings? A common denominator of mass shooting is possession of large number of weapons and ammunition. So in order to address the problem, you first have to deal with the weapons that are being utilized. AR-15, these military-style weapons. I think that I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment, but I don't think that the Second Amendment gives you the right to own a weapon that could kill 100 people in 1 minute. I just think it's a bad idea. We don't need assault rifles on the streets of Indianapolis or any city in America. And we certainly can't use them to go hunting. I just don't see the utility in having a law that permit weapons of mass destruction. Now, here's Nathaniel Lee's plan to reduce the legal issues surrounding gun violence. It's very simple. You got to vote, and you got to hold the elected official accountable. And here's what you got to say, that if you're going to talk about gun violence, we need to first have a conversation of how do we reduce the number of guns in our community. We're not safer when anyone and everyone can have access to guns and ammunition. So in order to stem this tide, legislatively, we must first address the root cause. The root cause of gun violence is that there are simply too many guns. There's too many guns that are loaded with ammunition that allows you to shoot many times. You could go out. I went to a gun show during the pandemic, and because I wanted to see what type of weapons. And they have these gun shows in Indiana at least 4 or 5 times a year, and they're really large production. And you have all types of weapons and things like that. And you could buy these guns. And I was thinking to myself, this is too easy of a process. So how do they know that the person who was buying these weapons don't have a mental impediment? How do they know that? So when you're looking at this issue, when you talk about the shootings in our community, the one thing that we must do as citizens, we must address the gun violence by first looking at the source of the violence, which is the weapons themselves. Whether you're a Second Amendment proponent or not, there's nothing in the Second Amendment that guarantees the right for every lunatic to own a weapon of mass destruction. So don't forget about that. That's an issue we have to deal with. Now, there's a lot of other issues that have been in the news lately. And I start off the show talking about the difference between immigrants and migrant workers. And I want to address that real quickly. Immigration is a broken system in the United States. It's been that way for a long time. I never understood how we formulated our immigration policies. Like, for example, you could be from Cuba in Latin America, and then you stay in the country, but you could be from a country just south of, such as Haiti or Jamaica or any of those other countries, and you get kicked out. I don't understand the differences between why we treat people so differently in our country. It doesn't make any sense to me when I look at our immigration policies and procedures. But I know this, in our city, you can go almost anywhere and there's help wanted signs still out. There's still a lot of job requiring labor, and a lot of this labor was supplied by immigrants. When I was in the Gold Building for many years, the people that cleaned the building, scrubbed the toilets, and made the building where they're being there, they were immigrants, not migrant workers that we usually confuse the term. They were immigrants. They came from different countries, Latin America, Mexico, or otherwise, and they did a great job of cleaning the building. Every now and then we see a single African American, and I will talk to them to find out, well, I was just curious, what do they pay you per hour? Well, what they were paying per hour was so bad, and I understand why people don't want to work there. You can live in, instead of Indianapolis, and own a decent place at the salary that they were paying for the immigrants that did our building. You just couldn't do it. It was just not enough money. So the net result is that we need to know the difference between. Yes. Oh, that's producer? Okay, we need to learn the difference between immigrants and migrant workers. And now,
I do the fittings.
okay, somebody bleed into my program, but in any event, as we go forward, we see all sorts of lawsuits now that are pending on the election. They're still pending. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about the massive settlement with the Dominion voting $787 million, almost $1 billion from Fox News. Now we're seeing that the people that was espousing falsehood, that false information about the election, Fox News is somehow letting go Tucker Carlson, and then recently another one of their star anchors. But they knew that what they were saying all along was fundamentally false. And so these lawsuits are working their way through the courts. There's more of these lawsuits that are still pending, and we'll report on at a later date. Now, one of the things I need to point out is that next Saturday is the Memorial Day weekend. And so we won't be broadcasting for Memorial Day because of the holiday. So we will be resuming the following week, but not that weekend. So just keep that in mind. And speaking of that, I like to also point out that when we engage in Memorial Day, we're giving special observance to all the folks that gave their lives. I had a brother who was special ops in the military in Vietnam. He got injured really bad there. And it left a stain in terms of my thought process. But we honor the people that gave their lives to make our lives safer. And we hope and we pray that we never have to engage in these type of wars ever again. Unfortunately, with aggression by certain countries, we might have to. We're getting more involved in wars in other parts of the country, such as Ukraine. So we just hope and pray that doesn't lead to wars in the United States where we have to have more servicemen go fight and die in foreign countries. And because I'm not in favor of that at this time, because I think that a lot of times that we do not give right deference to people that save their life. We don't treat our veterans fair enough. And I know for a fact, the Vietnam War, people that were in that war were treated very unfairly, even by the people in the country. So for Memorial Day, give special tribute to the people that you know and you love that spent their time protecting us. And don't forget. Now, at a point of closing, I'd like to thank our callers today for calling in to our show. And I'd like to take credit for all the people who listen to our various 8 stations in our Zoom, our Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you. And make sure when you listen to YouTube that you subscribe to it so we can make sure we can track our numbers for YouTube. And also, I'd like to thank our producers, my special in-house producer, Dr. Sonia Smith. Thank you very much, everyone. And we look forward to talking to you next week. Until then, may God bless and keep you. Take care.